World War II, heroes, legends, and the greatest conflict in history. Hello, dear listeners. Today, I'm going to tell you about the greatest, most devastating, and most complex conflict in human history, World War II. This war, which lasted from 1939 to 1945, claimed the lives of over 70 million people and forever changed the map of the world. But this is not just a story of numbers and dates. This is a story of extraordinary courage, the resilience of the human spirit, and beacons of hope shining in the midst of darkness. From the beaches of Normandy to the ruins of Stalingrad, from the remote islands of the Pacific to the occupied cities of Europe, I will take you on a journey through one of history's most defining moments. The beginning of the war. On the morning of September 1st, 1939, at 4:45 a.m., the German battleship Schleswig-Holstein opened fire on the Polish military depot at Westerplatte near Gdansk. At the same time, 1.5 million German soldiers were crossing the Polish border. The war had begun. But Poland did not surrender. At Westerplatte, only 182 Polish soldiers under the command of Major Henryk Sucharski resisted thousands of German troops for a week. Ammunition was exhausted, casualties were mounting, but they would not surrender. This small garrison carried out one of the most courageous defenses in modern history. Witold Pilecki, the man who volunteered for Auschwitz. Perhaps the most incredible of Poland's heroism stories belongs to Witold Pilecki. In 1940, this Polish officer made an unbelievable decision. He would voluntarily enter the Auschwitz concentration camp. Why? So that the world would know what was happening there. Pilecki deliberately allowed himself to be captured by German authorities and was sent to Auschwitz with camp number 4859. He stayed inside for 2.5 years. During this time, he established a secret resistance organization, gathered intelligence, and communicated with the outside world to spread the horror of the camp. In 1943, he became one of the few people to escape from the concentration camp. His report was one of the first detailed testimonies documenting the true scale of the Holocaust. Tragically, he was executed on espionage charges in post-war Soviet Poland. Pilecki's story only came to light years later. Europe plunges into darkness. The miracle of Dunkirk. In May 1940, 400,000 Allied soldiers were trapped on the beaches of Dunkirk in northern France. German tanks were approaching, and the situation was hopeless. Churchill himself thought they could only save 30,000 of the army. But then a miracle happened. Hundreds of civilian boats mobilized from England. From fishing boats to luxury yachts, from river steamers to private motorboats, civilians set sail. This evacuation, called Operation Dynamo, began on May 26th. For 9 days, under German bombs, these small boats carried soldiers. Charles Leithaler, the second officer who survived the sinking of the Titanic, rescued 130 soldiers with his own yacht Sundowner, a 60-person boat. A total of 338,226 soldiers were saved. As Churchill said, wars are not won by evacuations, but there are victories inside these evacuations.
The Siege of Malta. The small island of Malta, in the middle of the Mediterranean, was subjected to one of the most intense bombardments in history between 1940 and 1943. Due to its strategic location, the island was vital for both the Allies and the Axis powers. Italian and German aircraft bombed the island every day. Malta was subjected to more bombing than London. But the Maltese did not surrender. They established early warning systems with church towers converted into observation points. Civilians continued to unload ships at the port during bombing raids. Captain Frederick Peters was the captain of a tanker carrying vital supplies to Malta. His ship was hit, caught fire, and began to sink. Peters drove it all the way to port. The fuel and ammunition on board were completely saved. Peters received the Victoria Cross for this action. King George VI awarded the George Cross to the entire people of Malta, the only collective medal ever given to an entire nation. The Eastern Front, the Dance of Death. Operation Barbarossa. On June 22, 1941, the largest military invasion in history began. 3.5 million German and Axis soldiers attacked the Soviet Union along a 3,000-kilometer front. Hitler believed he would defeat the Soviets in 8 to 10 weeks. The beginning was catastrophic. Soviet air power was almost completely destroyed on the first day. Millions of soldiers were captured. At Kiev alone, 665,000 Soviet soldiers surrendered. The defense of Brest Fortress. On the first day of the invasion, Brest Fortress in Belarus witnessed a dramatic resistance. German plans envisioned taking the fortress in a few hours, but the Soviet defenders, led by Major Pyotr Gavrilov, held out for a month. Water was cut off, food ran out, ammunition was depleted. Defenders infiltrated German lines during combat to collect water. The wounded continued to fight. They wrote messages on the walls like, "I am dying, but I will not surrender." Major Gavrilov was one of the last 40 Soviet defenders. He did not release his weapon even when he passed out. When he was captured at the end of July, even German soldiers saluted with respect in the face of such courage. Stalingrad, the bloodiest battle in history. In the summer of 1942, Hitler decided to take Stalingrad. This city was not only strategic, but bore Stalin's name and had tremendous propaganda value. The assault began in August. The German 6th Army and 4th Panzer Army entered the city, but the Soviets fought for every meter. The battle was fought street by street, building by building, room by room, even staircase by staircase. Pavlov's house, Vasily Pavlov, was a 24-year-old sergeant. On September 27, 1942, he was assigned to defend a 4-story apartment building. This building was at a strategic crossroads. Pavlov, with his small unit of 24 soldiers, defended the building for 58 days. German attacks never stopped. Tanks, artillery, bombers. But Pavlov's men were resilient. They turned the building into a fortress. Barricades in the basement, holes in the walls, snipers on the roof. At night, they secretly went to Soviet lines to carry water and ammunition. Marshal Chukov later said Pavlov's house inflicted more casualties on the German army than it took to capture Paris.
Vasily Zaitsev, the legendary sniper. In the rubble of Stalingrad, another legend was born. Vasily Zaitsev was a young soldier from the Ural Mountains. His grandfather had taught him to hunt wolves. Now he was using these skills in the ruins of Stalingrad. Zaitsev shot over 225 German soldiers during the war, but his most famous confrontation was with a legendary German sniper named Colonel Heinz Thorvald. After days of cat and mouse, Zaitsev defeated his opponent.
But Zaitsev was not just a sniper. He also taught others. He established a sniper school and trained hundreds of Soviet snipers. His techniques formed the basis of modern sniper doctrine. The Siege of Leningrad, 872 days of starvation. In September 1941, German forces surrounded Leningrad. The ensuing siege became the longest and deadliest siege in modern history, lasting exactly 872 days. Winter came and temperatures dropped to minus 40 degrees Celsius. Food ran out. People received 125 grams of bread per day mixed with sawdust flour. The dead froze in the streets. Approximately 1 million civilians died from starvation, cold, and bombardment. But Leningrad did not surrender. Dmitri Shostakovich composed his Seventh Symphony while the city was under siege. On August 9, 1942, musicians exhausted from hunger performed this work inside the city. The concert was broadcast on radio and played over loudspeakers to German lines. It was a gesture showing an unbreakable spirit. The Pacific Front, Fire and Water. From Pearl Harbor to Wake Island. On the morning of December 7, 1941, Japanese aircraft attacked Pearl Harbor. America was deeply wounded, but entered the war. However, a lesser-known story took place on Wake Island. This small Pacific coral atoll was defended by 449 American military and civilians in December 1941. After Pearl Harbor, the Japanese attacked to take Wake. The first Japanese invasion fleet was repelled, the first defeat suffered by the Japanese Navy at this point in history. The defenders under Major James Devereaux held out for 2 weeks. Eventually, the Japanese returned with a larger force and took the island. When the Japanese offered to surrender came, Wake's commander sent this message: "Send us more Japs." This simple but defiant response became a symbol of American resistance. The Doolittle Raid. On April 18, 1942, Colonel Jimmy Doolittle embarked on an impossible mission with 16 B-25 bombers to bomb Japan. The problem was that B-25s were not designed to take off from aircraft carriers. Crews trained for months. The aircraft carrier Hornet approached Japanese waters. The planes took off from the swaying deck in an untested manner. They bombed Tokyo and other cities, the first American attack on the Japanese mainland. The return was even more difficult. They ran out of fuel trying to reach China. Pilots parachuted or made emergency landings. 69 of 80 men survived. Some were rescued by Chinese villagers. 3 of the 8 captured by the Japanese were executed. The military impact of the raid was limited, but the psychological impact was tremendous. America had not given up. Guadalcanal, the island of hell. In August 1942, U.S. Marines landed on Guadalcanal. This tropical island was the scene of 6 months of bloody warfare. The fighting was savage. The Japanese army fought to the death with banzai charges. Marines battled the jungle, malaria, dysentery, and endless rain. Night battles were particularly terrifying, with snipers in trees and ambush groups in the jungle.
Gunnery Sergeant John Basilone showed incredible heroism while defending Henderson Airfield. On the night of October 24 to 25, 3,000 Japanese soldiers attacked their positions. Basilone alone stopped countless Japanese soldiers with his heavy machine gun. When his weapon overheated, he changed the barrel with his bare hands and continued fighting. He received the Medal of Honor for his actions. Iwo Jima, Sulphur Island. In February 1945, American forces landed on Iwo Jima. This small volcanic island was strategically critical as a necessary intermediate base for bombing flights to Tokyo. The Japanese had turned the island into a formidable defensive network. 11 miles of tunnels, hidden positions, underground bunkers. The 36-day battle was one of the bloodiest battles of the Pacific War. On February 23rd, Marines planted the American flag at the summit of Mount Suribachi. The photograph taken by Joe Rosenthal became one of the most iconic war photographs in history. But the battle was not yet over. It continued for 3 more weeks. 27 Marines earned the Medal of Honor, half posthumously. Admiral Nimitz said, "On Iwo Jima, uncommon valor was a common virtue." Resistance movements. The French resistance and Jean Moulin. France came under Nazi occupation in June 1940, but many French people did not surrender. Fragmented resistance groups formed. Jean Moulin, a former prefect, united these scattered groups. Moulin secretly went to London in 1942 and met with de Gaulle. When he returned to France, he united all resistance movements under the National Resistance Council. Hiding his true identity, he traveled with false documents, evading the Gestapo. In 1943, he was captured by Gestapo leader Klaus Barbie. He was tortured for weeks but said nothing. He bit his tongue to protect his friends. He died from injuries caused by torture. Moulin became the symbol of the French resistance movement. Polish resistance, the Home Army, and Warsaw Uprising. Poland did not surrender to Germany. The Armia Krajowa, or Home Army, was Europe's largest resistance organization with 400,000 members. They conducted sabotage, intelligence gathering, and underground training. In August 1944, the Soviet army approached Warsaw. The Polish resistance decided to rise up. For 63 days, 40,000 resistance fighters battled Nazi forces. But the Soviets did not help. They stopped on the opposite bank of Warsaw and watched. German forces brutally suppressed the uprising. 200,000 civilians died. Warsaw was systematically destroyed, building by building, street by street. A resistance fighter, Wanda Traczyk-Stawska, joined the uprising when she was 15 years old. She carried messages, cared for the wounded, participated in combat. She survived and became a living part of Poland's history. The Norwegian heavy water sabotage. In 1943, Nazi Germany was racing to produce an atomic bomb. A critical component, heavy water, was being produced at the Vemork facility in Norway. The British SOE and Norwegian resistance decided to destroy the facility. The operation was nearly impossible. The facility was on a cliff edge 500 meters high, heavily guarded, and very difficult to reach in the middle of winter. In Operation Gunnerside, 6 Norwegian commandos parachuted in. They traveled for days on skis through storms. They infiltrated the facility, placed the bombs, and escaped without firing a single shot. The sabotage was successful and significantly delayed the Nazi nuclear program. Leader Joachim Ronenberg later said, "I can't say I wasn't afraid, but we knew our mission." D-Day and the liberation of Europe. Operation Overlord, June 6, 1944. Before dawn broke, 156,000 Allied soldiers were crossing the English Channel. The landing on the beaches of Normandy was the largest amphibious operation in history. Omaha Beach, bloody Omaha. Omaha Beach was the deadliest. German defenses were much stronger than expected. Soldiers in the first wave came under fire as soon as they landed on the beach. Machine guns, mortars, artillery, there was nowhere to escape. Brigadier General Norman Cota walked on the beach and rallied the soldiers. "Did you come here to die on the beach or to go inland?" Cota's courageous leadership galvanized the panicked soldiers. Ranger commandos climbed the 30-meter cliffs at Point du Hoc to silence German artillery positions. They climbed with rope ladders and hooks under German fire. At the top, only 90 of the 225 Rangers could still fight 2 days later. Paratroopers, the night jump. On the night of D-Day, 13,000 American paratroopers jumped over Normandy. The 101st and 82nd Airborne Divisions were tasked with securing key bridges and roads. The jumps were chaotic. Anti-aircraft fire, clouds, and poor navigation scattered paratroopers over a wide area. Many soldiers found themselves alone behind enemy lines. First Lieutenant Richard Winters and his small team silenced German artillery positions at Brecourt Manor. With only 12 men, they assaulted 50 German soldiers and 4 gun positions. Their tactics are still taught at West Point. Juno Beach, Canada's Day. Canadian soldiers landed at Juno Beach. They faced stiff resistance, but were the forces that advanced deepest from the beach. They liberated Courcy-sur-Mer and surrounding villages. Charles Martin was a member of the Canadian Tank Corps who fought at Juno on D-Day. His tank was hit. Crew members were killed. Martin got out, rescued wounded comrades, and climbed into another tank to continue fighting. Martin Garden, a bridge too far. In September 1944, Field Marshal Montgomery proposed a bold plan, Operation Martin Garden. Paratroopers would capture key bridges in the Netherlands. Tank units would advance rapidly and enter Germany. The plan was ambitious, perhaps too ambitious. At Arnhem Bridge, the 1st Airborne Division encountered unexpectedly strong German resistance. Colonel John Frost and the 2nd Battalion captured the north end of Arnhem Bridge. While the rest of the plan collapsed, Frost's men defended the bridge for 3 days and nights. Ammunition ran out, food ran out, casualties mounted, but they did not surrender. Eventually, they were overwhelmed. Frost was wounded and taken prisoner. Even German commanders bowed with respect in the face of such courage. The Battle of the Bulge, the last German offensive. December 1944, the Ardennes forests. Hitler played one last gamble. Break through Allied lines and take Antwerp. 250,000 German soldiers went on the offensive. The town of Bastogne was besieged. The 101st Airborne Division was defending the town. The German commander demanded surrender. McAuliffe's response went down in history. Nuts! Relief did not come. The town would fall. But on December 26th, Patton's Third Army broke the siege. This was one of the fastest military maneuver changes in history.
The end of the war. The fall of Berlin. In April 1945, the Soviet army surrounded Berlin. The final battle began. German defense was hopeless. Old men, children, last Nazi fanatics. Every building was a fortress. Soviet soldiers had to capture every room, every corridor. Tanks were used in street fighting. Berlin was in ruins. On April 30, Soviet soldiers captured the Reichstag building. Melaton Kantaria and Mikhail Yegorov planted the Soviet flag at the top of the building. Hitler committed suicide the same day. Hiroshima and Nagasaki, August 6, 1945, 8:15 a.m. The Enola Gay bomber dropped the atomic bomb, codenamed Little Boy, over Hiroshima. In an instant, the city vaporized. 80,000 people died instantly. Tens of thousands died from radiation. 3 days later, Fat Man hit Nagasaki. Japan surrendered. The bombings caused ethical debates, but ended the war. A global resolve emerged that these weapons should never be used again. Surrender in Tokyo Bay. On September 2nd, 1945, the battleship USS Missouri was anchored in Tokyo Bay. Japanese representatives signed the surrender documents. The 6-year war had officially ended. General Douglas MacArthur spoke at the ceremony. Today, I hope to lose peace. But instead, I hope we win a better world based on protecting the dignity, equality, and right to live in justice of all humanity. Legacy and heroes. The Holocaust and heroic rescuers. The darkest chapter of World War II was the Holocaust. 6 million Jews were systematically murdered. But in the midst of darkness, there were beacons of hope. Oskar Schindler. German industrialist Oskar Schindler was initially working for profit. He opened an enamelware and ammunition factory in Krakow using cheap Jewish labor. But as he saw the reality of the concentration camps, he changed. Schindler saved Jewish workers from death by showing them as indispensable. He gave bribes, deceived Nazi officials, spent his own fortune. Schindler's list held more than 1,200 names. Each one was a life saved. By the end of the war, he was bankrupt, but 1,200 people were alive. The descendants of these people today number an estimated 8,500. One person can make a difference. Irena Sendler. Polish social worker Irena Sendler was one of the greatest heroes. She obtained a permit to work in the Warsaw Ghetto, supposedly for typhus control. In reality, she was smuggling Jewish children out. Babies in toolboxes, children in ambulances, some through tunnels from the cemetery entrance. She buried the real identity of each child in jars, hoping they might one day be reunited with their families. She saved 2,500 children. The Gestapo captured her, tortured her, sentenced her to death, but the Polish resistance saved her. She hid until the end of the war. When she was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize in 2007, she was 97 years old. She said, "I have a guilty conscience that not every child could be saved." Raoul Wallenberg. Swedish diplomat Raoul Wallenberg was sent to Budapest in 1944 to provide protection to Jews. Wallenberg issued thousands of protective passports, documents claiming they were under Swedish protection.
But he did not settle for paperwork. He climbed onto deportation trains, distributed passports, defied Nazi weapons. He established safe houses, buildings he claimed were Swedish soil. He saved an estimated 100,000 Jews. In January 1945, he was arrested by the Soviets. He was never seen again. He probably died in Soviet captivity in 1947, but his legacy lives on. The War of Women. World War II was the first conflict where women stepped into major roles. Soviet female pilots, the Night Witches. The 588th Night Bomber Regiment was composed entirely of women. They used PO-2 biplanes, slow, wooden, and canvas aircraft. With bombs dropped by hand, they flew silently, shutting off their engines and gliding toward targets. German soldiers called them Nachthexen, or night witches. When they heard the sound resembling a broomstick, they would panic and run to shelters. Nadia Popova flew 852 combat missions. Her plane was hit 42 times. She could fly 18 missions in one night. She survived the war and lived to age 92. Nancy Wake, the White Mouse. New Zealander Nancy Wake was one of the most dangerous resistance agents in France. The Gestapo called her the White Mouse, the woman they could not catch. Wake helped Allied airmen escape, organized sabotage, attacked German convoys. Once, she rode 500 kilometers by bicycle to transmit radio codes. Her legs were swollen, exhausted from fatigue, but she succeeded. During a night raid, a German guard had to kill her with his bare hands. She later said, "I have no regrets. He was a Nazi and we were at war." After the war, she received medals from the French, British, and American governments. The Australian government rejected her because she was a woman.
The Tuskegee Airmen. In America, racial segregation still existed, but in 1941, the first black combat pilots began training in Tuskegee, Alabama. They were known as the Red Tails because of the distinctive red tails of their aircraft. They escorted bombers in Europe. They faced prejudice, but their performance was undeniable. They flew over 15,000 combat missions. They shot down 112 enemy aircraft. Most importantly, they rarely lost bombers they escorted. Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. was the commander of the Tuskegee Airmen. After the war, he became a general, the first black general of the U.S. Air Force. Navajo Code Talkers. In the Pacific, the Japanese were constantly breaking American codes. The solution came from an unexpected place, the Navajo language. More than 400 Navajo Americans served as code talkers in the Marine Corps. They used the Navajo language as code, a complex, tonal, unwritten language. They invented new words for military terms: iron fish for submarine, turtle for tank, fast eagle for fighter plane. The code was never broken. In the first 48 hours at Iwo Jima, 6 Navajo code talkers sent and received 800 messages flawlessly. Colonel Howard Connor said, "Without the Navajos, the Marines would never have taken Iwo Jima." The cost of war and its lessons. The humanity behind the numbers. 70 to 85 million people died. Every number is a name, a life, a story. The Soviet Union lost 27 million. Poland lost 17% of its population. China lost 15 to 20 million people. But the numbers don't tell the whole story. Orphans, widows, shattered families, burned cities, destroyed cultures,
trauma lasted for generations. Technological legacy. The war brought tremendous advances in technology, both good and bad. Radar, jet engines, antibiotics, blood transfusion techniques, plastic surgery. Revolution in computer technology to break the Enigma code. But also the atomic bomb, missile technology, chemical weapons, humanity's ability to destroy itself. The United Nations and the New World Order. On the ashes of war, a new world was born. The United Nations was founded in 1945 to save future generations from the scourge of war. The Marshall Plan rebuilt Europe. Former enemies became allies. Germany and Japan transformed into democratic, peaceful nations. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights was proclaimed in 1948. The horror of the Holocaust led to a commitment of never again. The responsibility to remember. Today, the veterans who lived through those days are rapidly leaving us. World War II is passing from living memory into history. But the stories must live on, not just the heroics, but also the mistakes, the horror of war, but also the resilience of the human spirit. An elderly guide at Auschwitz says, "You don't come here to learn to hate. You come here to learn how important it is to love." Conclusion. World War II was humanity's dark age, but at the same time, it was a period that showed that ordinary people can do extraordinary things. Witold Pilecki voluntarily entered hell. Irina Sindler saved children by risking her own life. John Basilone stood alone against an army. Navajo code talkers used their language as a weapon. And millions of unnamed heroes, military resistance fighters, underground couriers, those who hid and protected others, took incredible risks. They taught us that dark times produce heroes. Every individual action matters. Good can triumph over evil. Today, the world faces complex challenges again, but the lessons of World War II still echo. Freedom is not free. Democracy must be protected. Human rights are universal, and we must never, ever surrender. To the memory of the veterans, both the living and the dead, to those who resisted, to the rescuers, and to future generations with the responsibility to keep their legacy alive. History may not repeat itself, but it rhymes. If we remember, perhaps we will never see such a catastrophe again. Thank you for listening. Let us never forget.